All right, appreciate everybody for joining us for Coach Franklin's spring press conference. We'll start with an opening statement from Coach, and then we'll do a few questions on Zoom, and then we'll open it up to the room.
First of all, just wanted to congratulate Kale and the wrestling program. I was fortunate last week to go watch a practice, and then this year we didn't have a conflict. We've always had a conflict with spring ball, so didn't have a conflict. That also happened to be in Philly, so was able to go down and be a part of it, which was awesome. So obviously Kale and our wrestling program continue to do unbelievable things. So I wanted to give them a shout out. Getting into spring ball, just briefly. Obviously, we have some new and moving parts that we're working through. So that these 15 practices will be very, very important. We had a really good winter workout period. I think the guys are in a really good place. Been very, very pleased with how the staff has handled some of the adjustments. It's been a grind. As you know, just like on offense, the time that we have to spend on defense, getting everybody on the same page, staff first, players second, has been good. But there's still a ton of work that has to be done during spring ball and then over the summer training period before we open the season up against Nevada. So look forward to answering you guys' questions and open up the questions.
Let's go to Rich Garcella and Neil Riddell. You're on deck.
Thanks, Rick. Good afternoon, James. How are you?
Hi, Rich. How are you?
Good. Really good. Kobe King, how do you go about replacing him, not just the position itself, but as a leader of that particular group?
Yeah, I think, the Mike linebacker in a lot of ways is like, the quarterback, of the defense. You've heard that before, obviously. But then also when there's a guy that's been doing it for several years, and a guy that just has such a good feel in the box of defeating blocks, slipping blocks, anticipating runs, playing downhill, just a very, very productive player that really ran that position. So it's going to be a heck of a competition. We got some guys like DeLuca and Rojas that have a ton of experience. Well, I wouldn't say a ton of experience, but a lot of experience. And then there's some guys like Wiley who's coming off an injury that we're going to need to get evaluated. You got Tamir Robinson that's ready to take the next step. Specca's a young player that we're expecting to take the next step as well. You got Arrington, you got D, you got Tash, who's been impressive since he showed up on campus, him and Arrington. So there's a number of guys. Kari Jackson is a young guy ready to take the next step. So there's a number of guys, but right now I'm not sure how it's going to play out. One of the things that I think helps is we're probably going to go back, I think you guys know this, go back to my Vanderbilt days and then some of the days, some years when we've been here a little bit more than others, but we'll probably base more out of a 4-2-5, which I think also helps with that. That doesn't mean that we still won't go sub-package and go to a 4-3 when it makes sense, when it puts our defense and our team in the best position to be successful. But we were always a 4-2-5 coming to Penn State, and then you get to Penn State and you got really good linebackers and it's LBU. Then some years it didn't necessarily make sense doing that. And then obviously with some of our youth and lack of experience at linebacker, this is a way that I think fits our personnel this year and also fits, with what Jim has liked to do in the past. And obviously these were a lot of our conversations before him coming here.
Let's go to Neil Riddell, followed by Frank Bodani.
Hey, thanks, Greg. Hey, James.
Hey, Neil.
Hey, I was curious, how will you approach the workload for your kind of established veterans, Drew, Singleton, Allen, Tanai, those guys that are really, kind of know what they can do, right?
Is it a question or a statement?
maybe a little of both. How will you approach
Yes, sir.
your veterans?
Yeah,
Got me.
What was the last thing you said?
You caught me.
Yeah. Very similar to what we've always done in the past. With our established guys, you guys saw it with Olu Fashanu, like with our established guys who've played a lot of football, we will modify their reps. It's a fine line, because they still need to get better. That's why they came back. So we need to be smart about that. I also think it creates an opportunity for the guys that are behind them that are competing for more significant roles. It gives you a better evaluation on those guys as well. But for our established guys, we talk about as a staff, we go around each position. Coach will talk about what his plan is for what guys, make sure that we're on the same page, how I see it as well as how they see it. And then we'll implement that during spring ball. We did the same thing with Tyler Warren last year. So I would say there's probably about one if not two guys like that at every position that will have some form of a modification this spring and really in training camp as well.
Let's go to Frank Bodani, followed by Johnny McGonigal.
Hey, good afternoon, James. How are you today?
Good, how are you, Frank?
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm always impressed with the consistency of your hair.
Oh, my goodness.
Combination of haircut, and I think we've talked about mousse in the past. Isn't it what you use? Mousse, isn't it what we've talked about? Or is it gel?
No, that would be gel.
Gel, I'm sorry. The consistency is impressive.
You're a little envious considering your situation.
I agree. It was the same thing that happened, at the Notre Dame press conference. So, people thought I was taking shots. I was not. I was envious of his hairline, just like I'm envious of yours right now.
Okay, no shots, but I do want to ask you about Drew Allar, if I may.
You just want to start talking about what you got on the call for, not your hair.
I'm gonna forget if I won't.
I get it.
Okay. So, your senior quarterback, what is his next step as in development-wise, and particularly with this spring, what are you looking for from him, from Drew, as improvement, or just how can this spring, do you think, help him the most going forward, specifically?
Yeah, so a couple things. I think number one, I get this question a lot about a lot of players or on offense and defense. A lot of times it's not like one thing. And I would say that's the case with Drew. He needs to take another step this year, which I think he's done every single year that he's been here. He needs to take another step, when it comes to his mobility. He needs to take another step when it comes to his leadership. He needs to take another step in terms of his, his completion percentage. Needs to take another step in terms of his touchdown to interception ratio. It's really all of it. There are some things that me and Drew have had some conversations with Danny O'Brien that those conversations will stay between us. But I would say, just being transparent with you, I will say I don't think it's one necessarily specific thing. It's all of it. And the thing that's exciting about Drew, and you guys see him, he may be 6'5", 235 pounds, but he's still got a lot of growth and development. I mean, he's a young kid, and he has taken significant steps every single year. As you guys, I think, are aware, he puts in a ton of time and knows how to prepare the right way, both mentally and physically. I think Danny does a really good job with him as well. I think the room challenges him as well. I also think when you bring in new pieces, like the two new wideouts we brought in, that puts him in a position to coach and get those guys ready. So all those things, but I wouldn't say one specific area that I'm looking for him to grow in.
Let's go to Johnny McGonigal.
Happy spring, James. How are you?
Good, Johnny. How are you?
Good. At the wide receiver position, James, Devonte, Ross, Kyron, Hudson, some newcomers, even redshirt freshmen. How do you think they took to winter workouts from your conversations with Marcus? And how do you and Marcus feel about that room, that group, going into spring ball?
Yeah, as you know, you guys have saw like the competition winners and things like that we post on social media, but we don't have footballs really involved. So to really judge a wide receiver before you've seen them, at practice and running routes and creating separation and one-on-ones and making contested catches and catch percentage and catch radius and those types of things, it's hard to say. It's just hard for me to say that. In terms of their attitude, in terms of their work ethic, in terms of their demeanor, in terms of their fit in our locker room, all those things have been really good. In some ways, I would say recruiting guys like Ross out of Troy and schools like that, a lot of times those are exciting because no knock on any other school or any other place, but we just have a little bit more resources, so those guys have a chance to develop a little bit more than when you go get a guy from a similar type program. So it's been interesting to watch those guys grow. They've been awesome. And I know they've been a hit with their teammates in terms of kind of just how they've been in the locker room. So we'll have a better idea. You guys will have a better idea after today. We'll talk about that at the end of this press conference. We'll talk about that in more detail, but we'll all have a better idea after spring ball.
Let's go questions in the room over here on the right. Mark?
James, I just wanted to acknowledge we have an empty seat back there where Lou would usually be, and he'll be missed in this room. I wanted to ask you.
I agree, and I'm glad you brought that up.
He's always monitoring all of us, so it was fun to have him here, and he'll be missed.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, with respect to the team, can you tell us about the availability of Rojas and Rapp, and maybe even Donkoh for the spring? I saw that Rojas was in a bit of a sling, and we obviously know the other two guys weren't available for much of last year.
Yeah, so I don't want to speak in terms of the length of spring ball because I don't know exactly how that will play out, but they will not be fully available in the beginning of spring ball, and we'll just see how that goes. It's hard to say. Everybody kind of heals differently and at a different pace, and how they attack treatment and those types of things. Obviously, our doctors and trainers kind of have basic guidelines about how long certain injuries take to heal and things like that they go by, but that's hard to say. But they're not completely available to start spring ball. There's some things they'll be able to do, and there's some things that they won't.
In the front, Audrey?
Hey James, how are you?
Good, Audrey.
Good, thank you. I wanted to go back to Ross and Hudson a little bit, if I may. What kind of initially excited you guys about both of them as you kind of went through the process? What are maybe some of the traits or attributes that stood out?
Yeah, so Hudson, I'll start with him. He's just a guy, comes from a great high school program, played at a big-time college program, had success at this level already. But the other thing I will say about him is whoever you talk to from his high school, whoever you talk to from his previous institution, and on our current team, everybody just loves the guy. Tremendous work ethic, obviously made some big time plays. Everybody saw the huge catch he made against LSU, the one-hand catch. So he's done it at this level before. And obviously, I think there's also an aspect when guys know it's their last year. I think there's a motivation that comes along with that as well. With Ross, it's a very different scenario, different body type, different school he came from. But I will tell you, one of the things that really jumped out at us is I have a ton of respect for the University of Iowa's football program and what Coach Ferentz has been able to do there, specifically on defense and special teams. And that young man, I think Troy was beating Iowa at the half at Iowa, which we know that's a tough place to play. And in that game, I think he had 2 touchdowns on offense and 1 as a punt return on special teams. So, for him to do it against that type of opponent on that stage gave you a lot of confidence that that could translate to us. So, I think that game carried a lot of weight with us, again, specifically because we just have so much respect for what they do on special teams and what they do on defense, and he had a ton of production in that game.
John?
Hey James, how are you?
Good, John. How are you?
Doing well. You mentioned the 4-2-5 defense earlier and kind of leaning more into that again. With that fifth defensive back, what do you want that to look like? Where do you want that to come from? And what is kind of the archetype for that position moving forward?
Yeah, again, I think, we've talked about this before, whether it's on offense or on defense, the value of being able to hire really experienced coordinators. And if you look, our coordinators on offense, defense, and special teams, the amount of experience that our guys have, Knowles has been experienced for 17 years, Kodolnicki's been a coordinator, experienced for 19 years, and Lustig 20 years. And I say that because where that experience comes is you've been doing it long enough that there's a lot of ways to be successful. And I think early on as a player or early on as a coach, you feel like it's got to only be this way. I'm an 11 personnel guy. Well, my second tight end's better than my third wide receiver, but I'm an 11 personnel guy. Those things don't make a whole lot of sense. So where that experience helps is Jim's been doing it long enough to understand we got to get our best 11 guys on the field. At Oklahoma State and other places, that may have been 3 safeties. At Penn State, that may be 3 corners. That may be 3 safeties. Back to the conversation we had earlier, if we had 3 killer linebackers, we may play more true 4-3 base, however you want to call it, than maybe he's played in the past. So I think that's a little bit of this process right now. That's why spring ball is important. It's going to give Jim the ability not only to install some of the changes that we're making on defense, some of the tweaks that we're making on defense, but also to evaluate our personnel to say, how are we going to play at our best? Obviously, last year, we really did it the same way, right? We started the season before we lost KJ, where we had 3 safeties on the field, and I think we would have been very, very difficult to deal with if we would have had those guys all year long. So that's going to be the process this spring, is saying, okay, where are those nickels going to come from? I would say our list right now is coming from both the corner and safety room. Again, just based on the argument, how do we get our best 11 guys on the field and play to their strengths?
Over here in the front, Greg?
Coach, how you doing?
Good, Greg.
You said back in February that you could see yourself making some modifications to the spring game. So I'm curious, as you get ready to start spring practice, where you're at on the path to determining how you end up with the blue-white game.
Yeah, so I think first thing I'm going to say is I've been at Penn State now long enough to understand the impact that Penn State football has on this entire community. And I think everybody's aware of that, right? There needs to be give and take with this. We need to work together. A successful Penn State football program helps everybody out, the bars, the restaurants, the hotels. So for me to at any point sit here and say we're not going to have a spring game, I don't think that would make sense for a ton of reasons. The university schedules a ton of fundraising events around the spring game. A lot of people are in town. It's like a homecoming for the spring type of deal. So that's going to factor in always into our decision-making process. There's some things that we will not do. The game will not be televised for some of the reasons we've already discussed and you've heard other coaches maybe talk about. And we will have a spring game probably more similar to what we've had in the past, at least right now, as we go through these 15 days, that could change. But I could see it being maybe a little bit shorter. One of the things that I don't think we'll do is a halftime because there's been years where we'll have 75,000 people out there. We go halftime for 20 minutes and the parking lot becomes more attractive than the second half and the tailgating. So probably we'll condense it down a little bit, maybe a little bit shorter quarters, maybe no halftime. But also I know we have some real football people in our fan base that want to watch and evaluate our roster, get excited and have discussions at the barber shop or at the water jug and discussing what Penn State football is going to look like next year. So I also think it's valuable for you guys. So for all those reasons, we'll still do it, but it'll probably be a little bit less plays and it'll probably be a little bit shorter amount of time. It also probably won't all be live. It'll be a mixture of some live and some thud. But back to the question I got early on, when you're trying to modify, we got so many players that decided to come back. There's going to be a lot of players that we're going to modify from live reps, so that will impact it as well. But I want it to be enough that you guys feel like it was worth it, and our fans feel like, hey, I got a pretty good feel and an idea of what Penn State football is going to look like. And I also think, again, back to that point, Jim being in the stadium for the first time and calling it from the booth, and those things are important to get those reps, and for him to evaluate our staff and for him to evaluate our roster. All 15 of those days are like gold.
Over here on the right, Tyler.
Hey James, hope you're well.
You too, Todd.
Doesn't feel that far.
You're also another guy with consistent hair.
Thank you.
Gel?
One of the few things I got.
Gel?
No, I use like a paste to go. I used gel in high school. Gets a little flaky. Switched to paste. Has been an issue. So Frank, take notes.
Frank, you may want to talk to the guy.
We'll get to
Gel's been gone since the 80s. Move on. That's what he said.
Let me try to.
You said a paste?
Yeah, like a paste. Yeah.
I don't know what that means. Like a bomb?
I'll give it to you. You give it a shot. You tell me what you
What am I going to use? My eyebrows?
Looking back just a few years ago, there was a conversation about whether you could have a spring game because of the offensive line numbers. Now you've got people across the country saying that you might have the deepest offensive line in America. So I'm curious, from your standpoint, what does that make the formula for spring ball look like? Where Phil Troutman's trying to figure out who's the real option, where they can be an option. You're trying to get enough guys reps where they feel comfortable. I know you've got the spring portal window, so when there's big numbers, I know that looms large for staff and personnel decisions. What is the game plan for working through kind of the opposite of a numbers issue at offensive line this spring?
You know, it's interesting because you guys know this, but when I got here, I think there was a kind of an NFL philosophy dealing with how to handle the sanctions and the reduced numbers, and it really took like an NFL model where, you know, you had 5 starters and a couple swing guys, and we barely had that. So, you know, I think for a lot of us, whether it's your profession or mine, you get scarred by those experiences. And this was pre-portal, so you couldn't solve problems quickly. So, you know, I'm a big believer that you gotta develop and recruit up front on the O-line and D-line, and you really don't ever want to come short in recruiting of those positions. And because the other thing is, a lot of times those positions take time. We've talked about it. The closer you are to the ball, it's a man's game in there, and age and strength and size is a major factor. So we've worked very hard at building those numbers, and Trout has done a phenomenal job. So yeah, I think one of the things we've talked about in the past is, okay, you're short on the O-line. Well, how do you schedule practice to make sure the quarterback still gets his development or a running back gets his development? So that would really be in any position. If you're short at one position, it can screw up the development on that side of the ball as well as across the ball. So making sure that guys get enough reps is really important. We've been a big 2-spot team, whether we're practicing full speed 2-spot or whether we're doing the install periods in 2 spots. We will make sure everybody has a chance to learn and get reps. And to me, you learn best by doing, not watching. So we'll do that as much as we possibly can. But then there also may be some periods where we say, okay, you know, we're not comfortable going live, with the 1s and 2s, but we got a bunch of 3s and 4s that we need to evaluate. Some of them are just young guys, so we may go live with them and do some scrimmage periods with those guys. So we'll just see how it plays out, but being able to evaluate all those guys, being able to develop all those guys at every position is important. And to your point, whether you're heavy or short at a position, you got to make sure that it doesn't stunt guys' development. So all those things kind of factor in. That's why you spend a ton of time on planning out the practices. I typically plan them out with Ben Kerr and Nelly, our sports scientist. Then I get together with the coordinators, go through it with them, see if they have any recommendations or suggestions, and then we go through it with the whole staff. And as you know, we pretty much have all 15 set, but then we'll tweak them as we go based on what happened in previous practice, what we need more of, what we need less of, those types of things. But we're in a good position right now. I like the plan. I'm excited about what we're going to do, how we're going to approach it. But it's going to be an important spring ball for all the reasons I've already mentioned, specifically on the defensive side of the ball.
Front left, Mike.
Hi, James.
Hey, Mike.
As you know, April 7th, Judge Wilkins going to probably approve the NIL agreement. And I know you're a big planner, so have you already, or when will you let guys know what their number is that they're going to get? And how close are estimates for your quote-unquote payroll being around $16 million of that new money for football next year?
Yeah, I think this is the challenge, right? One of the things it's crazy. It's like having the transfer portal open during the playoffs. Don't make a whole lot of sense, right? And it's the same thing. We're playing our season. We're having to make plans for NIL and the transfer portal like everybody in the country. And you had to have those deals done before the transfer portal closed, because that affected people's decisions. But then also you didn't completely know or understand all the rules of engagement and how it's going to work out, because it was still being worked through in court. So this is a challenge all over the country. A lot of coaches are talking about this, a lot of ADs are talking about this, a lot of commissioners are talking about this. It's challenging. I think moving forward, after you get through year one of revenue sharing and things like that, you'll have a structure that you used in previous years that went well, and you want to build on it, or some things you want to tweak and get better. But that's, to your point, that's why this is so challenging, is you're having to make decisions and you're having to move forward really before you have all of the information and all of the guidelines. The decisions are still being made today, not only in the courts, but also with commissioners and the AFCA and all these things. So very, very challenging. But I think your question is a good one. Obviously, I'm not going to get into the specifics and the details of those things, but that's what's made this so challenging. Is it's not like right when we decided we were going in this direction that all the rules were mapped out for everybody, and the guidelines they're still changing as we speak. So it's been an interesting year for everybody.
So you don't want to comment on the $16 million?
Yeah, I think what I already stated was that I won't get into the specifics. And right now, obviously, all these things are still being worked out through the courts and everything else. Yeah, so I think I already answered that question.
In the back, T. Frank.
James, all the way back here.
Hey, T. Frank.
Hey, also jealous of everybody's hair. Is the only other bald man in the room. Hey, by the way, I'm jealous of how clean you get that. I can't seem to get the same level of...
Do you shave every single morning at 4:45?
No, definitely not.
That would help. In fact, it's a pretty easy solution. Every morning, do it every day. Sunday off. Give your head a rest on Sunday. Sunday's the day of rest for the scalp.
Got it. I want to ask you about your passing game.
How often do you shave?
Every third day, maybe.
Well, no, it's obvious why.
Fair enough.
All right.
That's fair enough.
I'll send you a picture of the starter pack on my sink every morning at 4:45. All the different things that I do and use.
Okay.
And I'll send you a picture of me and Shola. Shola sitting on the sink when she was little with shaving cream, doing the same thing. You want to ask your question?
I do.
Shut up.
That's all right. Although I am interested. Your passing game, as opposed to the running game, most of your offensive line running backs are returning. With your passing game, a lot of Tyler Warren's production and your receivers left this offseason. So I guess at this point, how much have you planned, or how much of the offense do you know, like what iteration is going to be this year, and how much do you still have to learn through spring football to have a better idea of who's going to be part of that and maybe where some of those targets are going to go this year?
Yeah, good question. And again, I think that's similar to what we talked about on the defensive side of the ball, and Dan is figuring those things out. To me, I look at it as an exciting time. And if I'm a wide receiver or a tight end, I'm excited because Tyler Warren had how many catches last year?
102, I believe.
Those catches got to go somewhere, right? So, if I'm wide receivers, I'm excited. If I'm tight ends, I'm excited because that production needs to go somewhere. And I think we've talked about this a little bit in the past, right? Like, the interesting thing is the wide receivers need to understand they're not just competing with the wide receivers, they're competing with the running backs. Like, who's going to get the touches? They're competing with the tight ends. Who's going to get the touches? The tight ends are doing the same thing. They're competing with the other tight ends, but they're also competing with the other rooms, the receiver room, the running backs for touches. And at the end of the day, we got to make sure that we're getting our best players the ball. And I think the other thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make sure we have enough of those people. Obviously you got two proven commodities in the backfield behind an offensive line to the point you're made. Well, who's going to be the guys that step up in the tight end room? Who's going to be the guys that step up in the wide receiver room? And that's going to be very, very important for the development of our offense, for the development of our team, and for us to take another step this year. It's a fine line because Tyler Warren made it very obvious that he should get the ball. But I'd also make the argument if you had a Tyler Warren and wideouts, then that's going to be even more difficult to defend. And we had some really good wideouts who did some really good things, but what I'm talking about is guys that everybody in the league, are concerned about and scared of. That's going to be important for our development. And I think we're going to have to do that through development of the wide receivers. We're going to have to do that through the development of our scheme. We're going to have to do that through the development of our quarterbacks. Obviously, a big part of that is going to come off of our play action pass, which should be a strength of ours that puts the defense in conflict. They're concerned about our running game. So those things help, and they need to be complementary pieces. But the interesting thing is we've had years where KJ Hamler was the guy that we were going to get the ball, and Jahan Dotson was going to be the guy, and Deshaun Hamilton was going to be the guy. The guys that we're going to say, these guys need to touch the ball a certain amount of times per game. So we've had it in years past, and we need that again. Whether that's 3 wideouts or 2 wideouts or whatever it is, we need that with the tight ends. Obviously, we have a similar conversation in the tight end room. That room is produced, pretty consistently, but there's still a big question mark when you lose a guy like Tyler Warren. There's a question mark there as well. So that's what spring ball is about, is installing all these things that we have in our offense and defense, and then trying to kind of have an idea to figure out by the end of spring what our identity can be and should be going into the fall, and making sure as coaches that we are not forcing the identity that we want to have on our team and on our positions.
Back left, Allie.
Hey James, how are you?
Yeah.
When you look at the $50 million investment from West Shore Home into the stadium, and also the way that Pat Kraft has talked about being fully committed to revenue sharing, whatever that ends up looking like, what confidence level do you have in Penn State's ability to compete as college football continues to change? Do you feel like that alignment is still moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I think it's obviously there's challenges with all of these things, right? But I think Pat has done a magical job of pushing and being aggressive, like I talked about, a Big Ten linebacker, but also having all the conversations and showing respect for all the parties out there, with some challenging and difficult decisions. But having relationships that we have developed with people specifically like BJ and West Shore Homes goes a long ways. And the fact that we have alumni that believe in what our university is doing and believing in what our athletic department is doing, led by Pat Kraft, and then our football program, those things are important. When you have a $700 million project going on at the same time that you're trying to get a roster put together with NIL, and that could be some challenges, of where that fundraising goes. Those things are challenging. So I think things have been handled really well now. Again, that doesn't mean it's always smooth, but I think from my lens and the things that I've seen, things have been handled really well, and making sure that we're showing everybody the respect that is needed and deserved, while also making difficult decisions that need to be made and moving the program, the university, and the athletic department forward. Challenging, but from my view, it's been handled very, very well.
We got time for one more. Back left, Andrew.
Hey, Coach.
Hey,
So in the past, you've been a big proponent of trying to do split squad practices and all that. I don't know if that's been a spring thing or just a fall thing, but how does the 105...
Spring and fall camp.
Okay. How does the 105 rule change how you functionally practice now?
Yeah, so right now it doesn't, but in the fall it will when we have to be at the 105. The thing that's interesting is one of the discussions I'm going to have after spring ball. We've already talked about 105. Our team is well aware of it. But one of the things that's going to have to happen is it's going to be different. Like, you look last year, if our number was 105, I think we had 16 guys that we lost during the season. So now you get 16 guys that you lost during the season who you're not allowed to replace under the 105 rules right now. So how are you going to practice? The interesting thing is, I think there was a study done, and the 105 number came because I think a lot of people were talking, and I think a lot of commissioners and ADs were saying, well, the NFL does it with 53, you should be able to do it with 105, but that's not accurate. The NFL, the number that I have seen that's been studied, their average roster throughout the entire season in terms of signing guys, practice squad guys, cutting guys, being able to replace guys is about 110 players throughout a year. So with that, with us not being able to replace players on your roster, that's where it's going to get interesting, and guys are going to have to understand, we may be doing some offense servicing the defense, some defense servicing the offense. Essentially, guys that are going to need to be on scout teams that have not been on a scout team maybe in 2 years. So, we've been fortunate with our roster numbers and our development of our preferred run-ons or walk-ons, however you want to describe it. We've had really good practices, and we've had really good guys taking a ton of pride in their role on scout teams. So it's going to be challenging, and it's like anything else, right? You can't be stubborn and just say, well, this is how we've always done it. You're going to have to adjust under the new rules and embrace the new rules. And part of that is getting our players to understand this is going to be a different season than they're used to. And everybody's going to need to embrace that and understand it. So that'll be a discussion. It's something we're going to have to talk about at the end of spring ball, just so everybody understands this season will look and feel differently. So it's going to be interesting though, because there's going to be some people in that 105 that have some real challenges, and then you're not able to solve that challenge. So I remember a few years ago, I think Maryland had lost 4 quarterbacks, and they had taken a linebacker who played quarterback in high school, or playing a quarterback. As we all know, the TV contracts and TV deals factor into this. Well, if you get a couple teams that have had too many injuries and the product that we're putting out isn't as good because of the 105, does the numbering get changed? Because TV pushes back and says, hey, we got to make sure that the product that we're putting on TV and that we're paying for is quality. And the quality's been really good. So these are all things that are going to be interesting. But again, just like Mike's question about revenue sharing and cord and things like this, is the first time we're going through it. So we can have plans and ideas of how we think this is going to go. But until you actually go through it, there's going to be things that we're learning and adjusting on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you very much, Coach.